the easiest way that that we can factor and solve, or that we can solve quadratics, would be to factor them. We've been talking about in classes using the big X method. So if I look at my first quadratic here, the main thing I have to remember is that my A value is a 1, my B value is a 3, and my C value is a negative 10. So when we're using the big X method, our C value goes on top, so negative 10 goes on top, and our B value goes on the bottom. Now what I want to do is I want to find two numbers that are going to multiply together to be a negative 10 and combine to be a positive 3. If I look at all the factors of 10, I have 1 and 10, 2 and 5, really that's all there is. If I use 1 and 10, that's not going to give me any combination that could possibly give me a 3, but I know if I use 2 and 5, there's a chance now of combining those and getting a 3. Now the thing with 2 and 5 is, since I have to get a negative 10, one of those has to be a negative number. If I try with my negative 2, 5 times negative 2 is negative 10, so that looks good. 5 plus negative 2 is positive 3. So that's exactly what I'm looking for now when I find my two numbers. I'm going to write them as binomials. So my variable, since I've got a 1 here for A, I can just put x and x. I'll put a positive 5 in here and a negative 2 in for these two numbers. Now this problem's not over yet. This kind of just simplifies it for us. Now we can say that we know that either x plus 5 has got to equal 0, or x minus 2 has got to equal 0. So really simple math here. If I subtract 5 from both sides to get x alone, I'll get x equals negative 5. Or if I add 2 to both sides, I'll get x equals positive 2. So that x equals negative 5 or x equals 2 are going to be my two x-intercepts. So if I were to graph this, since my A value is a positive, it's going to be facing upward. It'll cross here at negative 5. It'll cross here at 2. So this is kind of just a rough sketch here. But my quadratic is going to look something like that. And it can do that really easily by factoring and solving using the big X method. Now if I look at my next problem. My next problem, I've got x squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. So I can use the same x. Gotta find one where I can use I'm going to put negative 12 on top. I'm going to put a negative 1 on the bottom. Now I have to find two numbers that will combine to be negative 1 and multiply to be a negative 12. Factors of 12. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. I've got to think of something that's going to give me a negative 1, so I'm going to use 3 and 4, see if I can get that to work. If I put 4 and 3 in here, I know one of them has to be negative. If I make 3 negative, I'll have 4 times negative 3 gives me negative 12. 4 minus 3 is a positive 1. So all I've got to do here is switch that out. My two numbers should be negative 4 and 3. Because negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. And then negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. So that all works out. I'm going to write this one again in my binomial form. My x will go first. I've got a negative 4. I've got a positive 3. I know that's going to be equal to 0. Set both of these equal to 0, and I'm going to solve for x. Solve this one, I'm going to get x equals 4, or x equals negative 3. Again, those are going to be my two x-intercepts for this quadratic. And let's do our last one here real quick. So my A is a 1, my B is a negative 10, my C is a 9. So I'm going to put 9 up here. I'm going to put negative 10 down here. I got to find two numbers that will multiply together to be 9. So I could use 1 and 9, or I can use 3 and 3. Since I've got to get a negative 10, I'm going to use 1 and 9. Positive 1 and positive 9 give me a positive 10. So I'm going to use negative 1 and negative 9. Negative 1 times negative 9 gives me positive 9. Negative 1 combined with negative 9 gives me a negative 10. That looks good. That's what I'm looking for. So same behavior here. Put my x's in. I've got negative 1 here. I've got negative 9 here. So all I did was put this negative 1 here. Negative 9 goes there. Set them equal to 0. And I can solve. X minus 1 equals 0 is going to be one of my answers. X minus 9 equals 0 is going to be the other answer. So I know my x is either 1 or it's going to be a 9. So those are the easy ones. When our a value is a 1 and we're able to factor them out and use the big X method, that saves us a lot of time. There are going to be times where we can't do that. And in that case, what we can use is the quadratic formula. Our quadratic formula is up in the corner over here. It is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And remember, our a, b, and c values come from our quadratic formula. So on this one, my a value is a 5 because that's what's in front of x squared. My b value is a 16 because that's what's in front of x. And my c value is a 3 because that is my constant. Actually, I want to say that this is b. So we're on the same page here. Alright, so since my a value is a 5 and not a 1, I can't use the big X method. So I'm going to just start plugging into my formula now. So negative b, my b value is 16. So negative 16 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 16 squared, minus 4 times a is a 5, times c is a 3, all divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 5. Now, all we did was plug in my numbers from over here into my formula, or my equation or my formula up here. So we haven't simplified anything, we just simply substituted. Now what I like to do next is just simplify everything in here. So the first thing we will have to do is find what 16 squared is. So 16 times 16 is going to give me a 256. 4 times 5 is 20. Times 3 is 60, so inside here I will have the square root of 256 minus 60, which gives me 196. So I'm looking at the square root of 196, and if I do the square root of 196, that'll give me 14. So it's nice because we have a nice even number here. So 1 square root of 196 is 14. So what I'm going to do, knowing that this whole thing that I've got, I'm going to put it in red. This whole thing that I have in red now simplifies down to 14. I'm going to rewrite this equation and just plug in 14. So I've got negative 16 plus or minus 14 divided by, and let's simplify, 2 times 5 is 10. Alright. Now we see this plus minus sign. I don't want to throw you off because it's actually really simple. All you're going to do is you're going to solve this problem twice. Once you're going to use that plus minus sign, you're going to make it addition. The second time you'll make it subtraction. So I've got negative 16 plus 14 divided by 10. And I have negative 16 minus 14 divided by 10. Now it just comes down to pretty simple math for us. So I'll have negative 16 plus 14 will give me a negative 2. Divided by 10 will give me a negative 2/10. So that's going to be 1 of my x-intercepts is negative 2/10. The other one, I'll have negative 16 minus 14 divided by 10 will give me a negative 3. So essentially you get the same number of answers you would have gotten if you would have FOILed using the big X method. The only problem now is that we would have never known negative 3, negative 0.2. We probably never would have been able to get those numbers so that we could factor things down. But essentially it's all in the same thing for us. It's given us two different x-intercepts. That way, moving forward, we'll be able to graph these functions.